In this episode of the Transformation Project, we are so excited to be speaking to physiotherapist Liz Cirrani. Liz has been in the health industry for 13 years and a practicing physiotherapist for 10 of those. Her approach to physiotherapy has been highly influenced by her own life experiences, health challenges, lifestyle changes, sports performance, injuries, and of course, her training as a physiotherapist and postgraduate studies. Liz believes in treating the person as a whole, understanding the story behind why they are seeking physiotherapy and what it is they truly want to achieve for themselves in life. It is this holistic understanding that allows her to apply a comprehensive, long-term approach for her clients. Liz enjoys living an outdoor, movement-based lifestyle and is always up for trying new things and challenging herself in new ways. Running, surfing, hiking, and indoor skydiving are some of her hobbies, but she's also regularly exploring new functional movement patterns and embracing the benefits of a barefoot lifestyle. In this episode of the Transformation Project, we will be speaking to Liz all about pelvic floor health, a subject that we felt as women has been mostly undiscussed and being left as taboo. And so, you know us well, any taboo subject that has anything to do with women's health, we are ready to take it on. So without further ado, let's get into our episode with Liz Cirrani.
Hello and welcome to the Transformation Project, a podcast and community for women who are looking to transform into the best version of themselves, no matter where they're at. A place where you can listen, learn and laugh along with us as we dive deep into different topics to help you live a happier, healthier and more fulfilled life. Remember, we are all learning here together, and therefore the content and opinions of the hosts and our guests should not be taken as medical advice. Please consult your healthcare professional for any medical questions.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We are super excited. I'm especially super excited to have Liz on with us today. Liz and I have known each other for about 5 years, but not super well. We know each other through our partners, and she's a physio, and she has gotten me through this last pregnancy, just totally different than the first one. And that's kind of what I want to speak to about today, or have her speak to. I'm not really going to speak very much because she's the one that did. I did the physical work, but she told me what to do, and it obviously worked. So yeah, welcome, Liz. Thank you for being with us today.
Welcome.
Thanks for that.
I guess let's start first. So you're a physio, you're in the Gold Coast. Do you want to tell us a little bit about how you first got into that? And then we can kind of go into why I came to see you.
How I first got into physio started with my own health journey, as I'm sure it is the same for you and Yvette. When I was growing up, so I had a lot of health conditions, and the medical system at the time didn't really have a lot of answers for what was going on. And as I grew up, I always knew I wanted to work in health to try and help other people that were going through what I was going through. And then I just went to an information evening at a hospital one day that was talking about this is what physios do, this is what OTs do, this is what dietetics do, blah, blah, blah. And I never realized how broad a scope physiotherapy was and just how many people physios can influence, from children to elderly to sportsmen to cardiorespiratory. It was just super broad. And I was like, oh my God, sign me up for this. This sounds great. I can help everyone. I'll do it. And I signed up, I fell in love. And then as a postgraduate, I found a form of physio called Connect Therapy, which was very much we all know the body's connected, and we know it in ourselves. We'll be stressful, oh, I feel it in my shoulders, or we'll walk on a sore ankle and we'll start limping and be like, oh, now I put my back out because I'm walking on a sore ankle. So we all know that it's connected, but in physio school, they probably don't go as whole body as what Connect Therapy does. So then I went down the whole of Connect Therapy, and it was just this amazing eye-opener into how connected the body was, and absolutely revolutionized physio for me. And then on the side of that, I've done certificates in nutrition and just trying to incorporate as much education as I can so that the practice that I promote and the information that I give clients is very much whole body and holistic, and we're looking at all the other factors that could be influencing their physical self. So, how are they sleeping? What are they eating? how's their body healing, recovering, performing, all those things to bring it all into one. That's how I got into it, and that's why I love it.
I love that. That's amazing. I think we're really similar in that, because my husband's a chiropractor, but we have the same thing, that same idea of just how innately connected your whole body is. And I know middle of last year, I broke my knee. And so I was in a full leg brace. And I was meant to be in a full leg brace for 12 weeks. And because we approached it that way, I had my chiropractor, I had my physiotherapist, I was looking after my nutrition, I was looking after all those things. I actually got out of the full leg brace in 6 instead of 12, and I'm 47. So that was not expected for me. They were like, no, this is going to be a long process for you. But because we approached it from so many different angles, not just one, it just made so much difference. So I love that you think about it like that. That's amazing.
And when I had my health journey as well, I hate to say this, but the medical system's advice was to give me medication, which didn't work. And I then went on my own journey with alternative therapies and read lots of books. And at this point, I'm like between 12 and like 21, right? Like I'm young, getting into like advanced health sciences. And it was through my own education and my own exploring and my own journey that I realized how undervalued alternative therapies and natural therapy is. Like the answer is in nature. The answer is in how we have historically moved and done things. It's how society has changed our life and the conveniences that have been brought upon us that make us less healthy.
Yeah, for sure. And getting to not just slapping a Band-Aid, I think, is what everybody's gotten so used to, just slapping a Band-Aid on whatever's going on. You have pain, you take a painkiller, but not exploring where the pain is coming from, and then coming to somebody who would be able to, has a speciality in that area that can help them get to the root of what's happening, as opposed to just hiding it.
Well, we call it the healthcare system, not the sick care system. So healthcare is all about promoting health and preventing illness and sickness and disease. And I think people forget to access health services across all spectrums to help them feel even better. And we're in a habit of only accessing healthcare when we're broken or sick or injured. So I'm much more about let's deal with it before it becomes a problem.
And I think that's what like connected us so much. And that's what Ben always said, like, you need to go see Liz, you need to go hang out with Liz. And that is kind of why I went to see you. I didn't necessarily have anything wrong. I was a year and a half postpartum. I was running, I was getting ready for a half marathon. Like there was nothing wrong, but I just wanted my body to do better. And I'd never really had those moments after childbirth where you pee your pants. But when I started doing that half marathon, I had a couple of those and I was like, ooh, okay. Like I'm not cool with this. And a lot of people that I spoke to, they were like, oh, well, you can't do a half marathon after you have a kid. And I was like, well, I disagree with this.
I'm about to.
Yeah. And Ben was like, you need to go speak to Liz like this. Like, yeah. So anyways, that's what brought me to you. And I remember the very first session we had, we're talking about my running and my hips and my knees sometimes hurting. And you were checking my upper body posture. And I was like, no, Liz, my hips and my knee, that's what I want you to focus on. And you're like, no, like we're going to focus on this. And I was like, okay. And it's like what you said at the beginning, like we know our bodies are connected, but sometimes you just don't like mentally make that connection. And she adjusted something in my upper ring. I'll let her explain it because I still don't know exactly what magic she did. And then all of a sudden, like my stride was longer, like everything. So do you want to take us through like some of that stuff?
Yeah, actually, that would be really interesting. So just to get a little bit of the classification of things. So when I'm talking about someone's trunk, which is the upper body section that incorporates the rib on the left, right, the spine at the back, and then the sternum at the front. When I'm talking about someone's rib cage and their adjacent spinal and sternum and cartilage attachments. I call it the thoracic ring. So when I was doing your running assessment, what I saw was that there was compression around your thoracic region. So the thorax is meant to work like a spring and meant to move very dynamically when you're running, whereas yours wasn't. So that was, and it was, you were striking heavier on one side, and it was a side of the compression. So I knew that there was something going on there. And the thorax actually closely relates to pelvic floor health. So there was another kind of tweak there that, oh, thorax is compressed and she's got pelvic floor incontinence issues. Perhaps there's a link. So when you have areas of compression around the rib cage, so let's say I'm the rib and you're like compressed down on one side, this means that there's an increase in pressure throughout, like kind of pushing down through the abdominal cavity. So I knew based on the compression of the rib cage that your pelvic floor was holding more load. Hence, every time you step, your pelvic floor can't contract as much because there's more weight going down through it. So basically, when Jess and I were working together on this first occasion, I went up and supported her thoracic rings as though I was her muscles. So I was kind of like, all right, Jess, so if I'm your muscles, this is where you're supposed to sit. And I got Jess to do some breathing because that helps release the muscles. And then we did a few movements and that helps release the muscles. And I gave her a few thoracic stretches to release the muscles. And then I was like, okay, this time when you walk, I want you to, when you run, I want you to run like this. And then Jess just like took off like a horse on a racetrack. And I'm like running behind trying to keep up. And then Jessie's out of breath. She's like, I'm not cardio fit enough to run like that. Because basically what we'd done is we'd temporarily provided her body with a more optimal way to move better. And so that she was naturally able to switch on muscles that she hadn't been able to. Obviously, we'd only spent, half an hour together at this point. So in order for Jess to maintain that, that was then the next 18-month journey that Jess and I had together, where she was strengthening and improving her mobility and incorporating breathing techniques so that she doesn't need me to hold my hands in her ribs and then go for a run behind her. She can support herself and support her own thoracic rings, and then her whole body functions better.
It was crazy. I've literally never run that fast.
I've never heard that before. That makes perfect sense. Like in my head, as you're working through it, I'm like, oh God, that makes perfect sense. Would never have thought that. And I would imagine too, like so many women, even if they're running or not running, are having this sort of issue. Nobody's talking about it. No, but it's not something you want to discuss, like even with your partner.
Yeah.
And so how many people are struggling with this and not realizing that there is something that they can do that isn't just buying incontinence pads?
Yeah, so it was really interesting. Jess and I went for a walk a couple of days ago, and she said that, I hope it's okay that I share this, Jess.
Yeah. Yep.
Said that in quite a few of the mums groups that she's involved in, it's quite common for the women to be like, oh, running, oh, I couldn't do that. I'd pee my pants. Or, oh, I pee my pants just looking at my kids jump on a trampoline. And comments like that. And I think it's a real shame and also really alarming that women think that it is normal to have incontinence once you've given birth. It is common, but it is not normal. It needs to be addressed. And I suppose that comes in, when women are, whilst they are pregnant and soon after they give birth, that comes back to what information have they received from the medical system, and are we supporting women enough so that they are safe during pregnancy and they have all the tools that they can to look after their bodies post-delivery? Because obviously there's a lot of attention on, we've got this beautiful little baby like Jess is holding Asher right now. We need to nurture them and keep them alive and keep them thriving. But what about the mum's pelvic health? For the 9 months that mum was pregnant, there was an increasing weight that was building through that abdominal cavity. And we know that women can hold up to 15 kilos or more of amniotic fluid, placenta, baby's weight through their pelvic floor. And then on top of that, they have the trauma of giving birth, if they give birth, or they have a cesarean, which literally cuts open their abdominals to pull a baby out. And women who have a C-section seem to generally, I'm generalizing, believe that I didn't have a vaginal delivery, therefore I don't need to do pelvic floor. And then women who have a pelvic delivery seem to be like, well, I didn't get my abs split open, therefore I need to do lots of core exercises. And I don't, both of those beliefs I find really confronting, because like I am one of the health, like my profession, physios are people that educate women that know this is, if you've had this, do this. If you've had this, do this. These are your precautions, limitations. And it's upsetting for me that women aren't given the information to manage them better.
Completely. And that's why I feel like I've seen and spoken to you more than my doctor. I literally just go to my doctor to get like, check baby's heart rate, measure my stomach, make sure it's like growing properly. And then we spent all that time together. And that's where I feel like my pregnancy, this one, the second pregnancy, was so different compared to the pregnancy with the first one. Like both jobs really for the most part were the same. I was on my feet the whole time. I gained the same amount of weight, but this one, like I had less back pain. I still definitely had, obviously you have the stretching of the pelvic and like it is, or the pelvis, and it is uncomfortable, but it wasn't the same like load, like where it just felt heavy. And I was like, oh my God, I just need to sit down and like let my pelvis relax. Like I didn't have that. I did work a couple 10-hour shifts towards the end of my pregnancy. And yes, it was definitely sore by the end of those. Don't recommend it. But it was just completely different because we had done all that work before pregnancy and then the whole time during it. And not just with the pelvic floor, like what you were talking about before, working on my posture and not letting my belly like pull me forward.
Not giving into the belly, as I like to put it. So a couple of the key features of the things that we did work into your program. So with posture, if we start at the pelvis, because everyone knows the pelvis and the belly changes a lot during pregnancy. So when a woman's pregnant, obviously her pelvis throughout the 9 months needs to stretch and widen in order to prepare the pelvic canal for the baby to exit the body. The belly grows, but what also happens as the belly grows is what tends to happen is the belly pulls the spine forward. So the center of mass becomes forward of the feet. So then your upper body, the thoracic ring, trunk area that we were talking about before, it has to compensate. So some women have the lean back, others will have the round at the top, and then the head pokes forward. So it's a bit different depending on your own anatomy, which compensation you fall into. And Jess, was it you had the sway back? You just kind of poked forwards with your belly on pregnancy 1?
Yes. Yeah.
So what we were working on for you was teaching you the tools to have the strength around your pelvis. So being able to activate your pelvic floor effectively, which if we go back a couple of steps, you couldn't do unless your thorax was optimized properly. So actually, to give a little bit of background here, because Jess, in terms of Jess's whole body function, her pre-existing issue, if we call it that, was that she had some compression in the rib cage. So to help her be most effective in her pelvic floor, we needed to decompress around the rib cage so that Jess could actively activate her pelvic floor, because the pelvic floor is a lifting up around the pelvis and to support the pelvic organs. But if her thorax remained compressed, she'd have all this intra-abdominal pressure pushing down into her pelvic floor. So first thing to work on was the thoracic mobility, which we'd done prior. Then we were getting that pelvic control so that Jess wasn't, giving into the belly over the 9 months as the pregnancy progressed. But the other thing was she needed the thoracic mobility, but she needed the strength around her thoracic so that when the baby comes out, she can actually hold the baby and support the baby without compressing her rings, bearing down on her pelvic floor and having more incontinence issues, is the kind of the whole picture of it. And that's very common for most women that we'll see during pregnancy. We always want to work on pelvic control to support them as they become more lax. We want them to still have control so that they don't get heaps of pelvic girdle pain or pubic symphysis pain or sciatic or low back pain throughout their pregnancy. But we also want to make sure that how they hold themselves around their shoulders, thoracic and rib cage is optimal to support them throughout the pregnancy. This also can help reduce the effect of carpal tunnel. Jess, did you have any carpal tunnel around too?
No.
There you go. Cool. Because they're more supported proximally because they have strength, so then they're less likely to load excessively through their like the extremities.
And so is that something that they would work with someone like you with, or is there like, generally sort of exercises and things that, pregnant mums can do at home that are helpful?
So the general education for women as they, like when they're going through the phase of pregnancy, is don't start anything new that you haven't already done prior, because you don't know how your body will handle a new form of exercise. Prenatal Pilates is probably the thing that I find most beneficial for women, because Pilates is all about deep stabilization around the joint and then building strength on that with light resistance training. So that's probably the thing that I see all of my clients and friends have had the best pregnancy journeys when they've done Pilates throughout their pregnancy. I wouldn't say that Jess had Pilates because my skill set is so much broader. Jess had a little bit of rehab. She had a little bit of connect therapy. She had a little bit of Pilates. She had a little bit of a runner's program in there, because even though she was still pregnant, the reason she first came to me was running, and the end goal after that's a triathlon. So for as long as I could, I still had her doing Pilates running drills. So Pilates is probably the quickest way to answer that. And, women, I would recommend that women do that guided by a physiotherapist as opposed to a YouTube video, just because their body has varying demands over the 9 months. And I would hate for them to do it and injure themselves and think it was related to the Pilates, when in actual fact, they just needed a bit more guidance about how to support the body. And then towards the end of Jess's, she was probably less Pilates and then more flexibility based to prepare the body for birth. So after we hit the 3rd trimester, we do a lot less strength based and more mobility based, because her body then has to lengthen and open and relax and be ready to let a baby go.
And I definitely did not do any of that with the first one. I just kept going to the gym. I just kept lifting. I dropped the weights. Like, they weren't heavy weights, but I was still going to the gym doing like gym workouts. I didn't do yoga. I didn't do Pilates. I'm horrible. Don't kill me, Liz, but I'm horrible for warming up and cooling down. So there was barely any stretching of that. Whereas like this, it was just totally different. Can you quickly speak to, because I just think it's a cool trick, the trick you had me do with my tummy up and down, and why that was important? Because they like, all I knew was like, you get pregnant and you stop doing ab exercises and you do a shit ton of Kegels. Like that was like, that's what
everybody's all about the Kegels.
Yeah. You just do a lot of Kegels. You'll be safe. I was not safe after just doing Kegels with my first, let me tell you. And you just stop doing ab exercises. But that, like, I had so much strength in my abs, even throughout pregnancy, if that kind of makes sense and you can explain it.
So I kind of, Jess and I were calling it the party trick throughout her pregnancy. And basically from, 10 meters away, I could tell whether Jess was activating her pelvic floor and the stabilizers around her pelvis or not, because as she contracted, her belly kind of went in and lifted up. So she was supporting the belly. And part of that was that postural control around the pelvis that we were talking about. The reason that Jess felt she had more control with the second child versus the first child, is because of the pelvic control that she was using to help her support her posture and not give in to the belly. So it's a much more controlled pelvic contraction, as opposed to just doing a Kegel or just pelvic floor. So If we're talking about pelvic floor contractions, there's two different kinds. There's a power contraction, which is all or nothing, like as hard and fast as you can, squeeze it on, squeeze it off. And it's the power contractions that train us for times when we cough or sneeze and we don't want to leak. Then there's a low, slow pelvic control contraction, which is what Jess and I worked on more because her goal's running. So we keep going back to like, this is what she wants at the end of it. And the long, slow hold is working on pelvic floor endurance. So being able to lift and hold for longer periods of time. So everything that Jess did when she was training with me was ensuring she activated through her pelvic floor. She'd lift up, she'd get that slight pelvic contraction, which supported the belly to lift up as well. So it's like pelvic floor and a little bit of the belly kind of lifting up, not an abdominal brace, two different things. So she'd get that support in her body, and then she might perform squats in that position. She might do arm exercises. She might do walking. She might do breathing. And we just had her do a range of different exercises and put a range of different like challenging tasks on her body at the time to see whether her pelvic floor could withstand that pressure. That way, post-baby, she's more used to withstanding forces of all different kinds so that she can more easily and quicker integrate back into running for Jess, but just normal daily life and exercise and fitness and going to the gym and what she wants to do.
I know, because like I'm at 6 weeks right now. So I see my doctor tomorrow. When we're recording this, I'm at 6 weeks. So I see my doctor tomorrow. And I've had this conversation with Liz too before, because the first doctor I had after I had Kinsley didn't look at me, didn't touch me, just kind of said, "You feeling okay? Cool. Awesome. See you later." And that was my 6 week check. She gave me the all clear. Like I was all good to go. So I was speaking to Liz about this and I was like, so next week I get my all clear. So that's tomorrow. And Liz is like, make sure you get these things done, like, and checked, like, because you're not just walking out of there this time. So what are, obviously, like, you're not a doctor. So what is a doctor's requirements at a 6 week postpartum check? And then like, I know like we've kind of put, like, I know what program I'm doing moving forward after this, but like for other women that don't, like, you don't just get back on the treadmill after 6 weeks. Like where do you go from this point in time?
I think it would be really important at this point to go back to straight after birth, actually, because women aren't always aware of their precautions. And I don't even know if I've told these things to you. So initially in
I know the one that you're going to yell at me about, but that's okay. We'll get there in a second.
Initially in the early days after delivery, I'm assuming that hospitals are providing women with ice packs to apply to the area, that they are giving women compression pants to help support either the pelvic floor or the abdominal scarring, and that they're discussing increasing fibre intake and water for women so that because the first bowel motion can be quite scary and quite painful for a lot of women given the amount of trauma that's been in the area. So in the very, very early days, ice, compression and fibre are important to help ease the to help with healing around the pelvic floor region. For women listening to this that haven't been told this by their doctor, something that's really useful is like icy poles and just popping them straight up there or ice cubes straight up there. Because
that's clever.
Because then you have something internally that's helping to reduce this feeling of, let's just say, swelling around the perineum.
I had like an ice pack and some paper baggy pants. That was you were like compression pants. I'm like, do paper pants count? Because that's what I got. And I was in a private hospital.
It's personal preference. Like I myself hate tights, so I'd be in the baggy pants too. But more for supporting pelvic floor or supporting the abdomen. The pants that suck you in, the spandex ones, they're good to help women start to get a little bit of a sense of pelvic floor or a light abdominal contraction. Basically that's it. It just kind of holds everything together. And if they've had pelvic girdle pain or pubic symphysis pain, the compression pants can also give them a little bit of support, as opposed to having to wear belts and braces and things like that. It's not for everyone. As I said, I myself would hate to have tights on because I don't like tights normally. In the first 6 weeks, there's precautions on women. They shouldn't be lifting anything heavier than the newborn. So this is particularly difficult.
That's where I failed.
Yeah, this is particularly difficult for people who have, like this, the baby has siblings, the baby has older people in the family, because you might have a 2-year-old or a 4-year-old that still wants you to run around and play with them or pick them up or give them a cuddle. And ideally for the first 6 weeks, there shouldn't be lifting anything heavier than the baby's weight. That also includes prams. So prams are about 15 kilos. So lifting a pram in and out of a car, which again is really hard if you want to go to the beach and your partner's at work, getting the pram in and out of the car technically is a little bit too heavy for you, as well as heavy cleaning. So if you've been doing the cleaning in the last 6 weeks and you just had a baby, you're off the hook. Go get your partner and rewind the podcast and have them listen to the fact that you're not allowed to do any heavy cleaning for 6 weeks after you give birth.
You're welcome, ladies.
And then at the 6-week mark, your physician or pelvic health physiotherapist, I would hope, is doing a pelvic floor internal examination to check how your stitches are healing or what's happened with your tearing. So if it has been a vaginal delivery, there's 4 different levels of tearing. 1st degree, 2nd degree, 3rd degree, 4th degree, and then episiotomy, I think, is somewhere between a 1st and 2nd, generally speaking. If you've had a 3rd degree or a 4th degree tear, and if you've had a 3rd degree or 4th degree tear, you need to see a pelvic floor physiotherapist, full stop. Basically what that means is a 3rd or 4th degree tear, the tearing has gone from the perineum all the way around to the anus. So either there's like 2 different layers, and depending on which one it's gone through will depend on how much trauma there is around the pelvic floor. And you really want to be seen by a specialist if that's the case, because the 6-week mark for women who've had a 3rd and 4th degree tear, this is only the beginning of your journey. Yeah, whereas for women who've had a 1st or 2nd degree tear, you might be signed off at 6 weeks because the stitches or the healing have, or the tears have healed by that point. So 1st or 2nd degree, hopefully you might get the ticket 6 weeks. 3rd or 4th degree, your work is just beginning for your pelvic floor rehab. At the 6-week check, I would also hope that your rectus diastasis, your 6-pack muscles, are being checked to see if they have separated. So it's very normal throughout birth that the 6-pack muscles separate apart. There's a band of fascia that runs in the middle, and as the baby grows, this band of fascia can get wider and wider and wider. The smaller the person, the bigger the baby, or with multiple babies, the more that this separation can come apart. And it does naturally come back together after birth. Our bodies are amazing. This is how they were designed, but it's really important to get that checked because this relates to that intra-abdominal pressure that we were speaking about before. So the doctor should be checking this. Basically, they just place a couple of fingers at the top, middle, and lower part of the linea alba, and they get you to do a bit of a sit-up. And if the separation is more than 3 fingers, you need physiotherapy input to help get this to restore to a lesser degree. In regards to exercise and what's safe to return to, that's actually something that your treating physician should be commenting. I can't comment on it because it's different for every individual's journey. So when you go to that 6-week checkup, whether it's with a doctor or a women's health physio, ask them, like, what is it safe for me to do based on the status of my pelvic floor? Am I able to walk? Am I able to run? Am I able to go back to the gym? Am I able to go to yoga? Can I go play tennis, do karate, whatever it is that you want to do? Ask your treating physician what is safest for you. If they haven't given you much guidelines, then I would book in to see a physio so that you're getting a lot more individualized feedback based on what your body needs.
This is where I definitely went wrong with my first. So like I said, the doctor didn't check anything. And I felt okay. So I can't remember when I started going back to the gym, but I definitely went for my first run at 9 weeks postpartum. That was a mistake. I won't do that again. But I started doing ab exercises because when you Google it, like Dr. Google is like, yeah, you have this separation in your abs. You need to start getting them back together. So I'm like, yeah, I'll start doing some ab workouts. I know Liz is like, this is so bad. Then I come see Liz.
Cringing right now with you, Jess.
This is why I'm still seeing Liz. So then I go see Liz for the first time. What did I say? I was 18 months postpartum, I think. We've done a couple sessions together. And I was like, I made the comment, oh, I've never had my abs checked again. And she's like, oh, we should probably check that out. So we do. I still have, in one spot, I still had almost a 3-finger separation. And she was like, Jessica, these are the things that are a no-go right now. Like running, we need to hold off on. Like crunches, stop doing these things. Planks, stop doing these things. Like we need to like go back as if you were like 6 weeks postpartum. And I was like, oh, whoopsies.
You're a loose cannon, kid.
Yeah.
Honestly.
So I'm more prepared this time. I will not be doing planks starting tomorrow.
Crazy. I have a question here about the Kegel thing, because I know, so my eldest child is 20 and then my other one is 11.
Mm-hmm.
And so I have never heard a lot of this before, like ever. It was just like Kegels, just do your Kegels. And so, you know, even if you're in those like prenatal classes, the whole bunch of ladies just with like really concentrated looks on their faces, but nobody knows like how to do a Kegel, and is that even useful? And is there a good Kegel and a bad Kegel? You know what I mean? Like it's really hard to, how do you?
So the best way to have your pelvic floor contraction assessed is by a pelvic floor physiotherapist. So basically how that goes is you have an internal examination, they put their fingers inside you, and then you are asked to do a pelvic floor contraction with their fingers inside you, and then they will get the best sense of the grip around the fingers. So in some cases, and I suspect this was Jess, sorry, I shouldn't have even opened that can of worms. Sorry.
No, it's fine. No, I didn't. Are you saying, did I get one?
No.
Oh.
What I was going to say, can I share?
Yeah, whatever you want.
Yeah. Okay.
Jess is like, she's been amazing. You're talking about the pooping thing. Jess is just like,
I'm an open book.
Jess has taken it on herself to be like the person leading the charge in educating pregnant women everywhere on anything and everything they are to be expecting, especially the things that no one tells them. So
mostly those, yeah.
So with the internal examination, they put their fingers inside you, you do a pelvic floor contraction, and they can assess basically the grade of strength you've got circumferentially through the pelvic floor. And in some cases, it might be that there's not much contraction. In other cases, it could be that it's really, really tight for them to get their fingers in because there's so much tension down there. And so often in those cases, the pelvic floor is really tense, but it's also really weak because it doesn't have the ability to contract and expand. It's only got contraction. So if you're on contraction all the time, then you are quite weak. The other thing that can happen is there can be an imbalance somewhere circumferentially. So it might be that the front of the pelvic floor contracts, but the back of the pelvic floor isn't, or the back of the pelvic floor is contracting and the front isn't, or the right's contracting but the left isn't, or the right front, left back's contracting and then the opposites aren't. So that's where, if you want to know if you're doing a pelvic floor contraction right, there's only really one way to find out, and that's to go and have an internal examination and get someone who's highly trained to tell you whether you have it or not. Is probably the answer to your question of it.
Yes, awesome, good.
And then while we're on pelvic floor, for people who are kind of self-guiding their pelvic floor journey, as you lift, a few cues that I'll teach people is to think that they're drawing a tampon up into the vagina for the contraction, and then it's equally important that when they let the contraction go, they feel the pelvic floor relax.
Did you just try and do that, Jess? Because I did. I saw you on my face both changed.
So you want to feel the pelvic floor contract as you draw the tampon into the vagina, and you want to feel the pelvic floor relax as you let the pelvic floor contraction go. You might also think about squeezing onto your partner. That's another one that can get it. Or you might, if you've got really good awareness, you might literally just think of drawing up around the pelvic floor and then letting it go. If your awareness is really not good and you really can't feel what's going on down there, you can put your hand underneath your crotch, underneath your perineum, and draw your fingers up, draw your pelvic floor up away from your fingers, and then feel the pelvic floor fall back down into your fingers. So there's a couple of different ways that you can do it. You can put your own fingers up there yourself and see if you can feel it clench and then relax. It is very important that just as you feel the contraction, that you feel the relaxation around it. In some populations of people who only ever focus on the contraction, they develop what's called a hypertonic pelvic floor, which is far harder to downtrain once the muscles are overactive.
What about when people are like, oh, I'm peeing, and then I can stop the flow of pee? Is that still pelvic floor?
Yes, that's a really bad practice to get into.
Why?
Because you can then develop urinary retention issues.
Okay.
So at most, if you want to know if your pelvic floor contraction is good, you can try and stop the flow of pee. At most, do it once. Definitely do not do it all the time, because if you're sitting down to do a pee, this is when your pelvic floor is like, I get to relax and let the urine out. And if you start to get into the habit of contracting during that process, your bladder's like, oh, I let it out? No, I don't. I got to let it out. No, I don't. And you're disrupting the neural pathway. Like your brain's like, no, this is the time. This is when I get to let it go. And then if you start activating at that moment, your brain and your body are going to be like, I don't know which signal is the right signal right now. Am I supposed to let it go, or am I supposed to contract it? And if you keep contracting when you're trying to pee, you won't adequately let the urine out. You might get UTIs, you might get urinary retention issues, you might get an overactive bladder or a hypertonic pelvic floor. Really not a good time to do it.
So if somebody is looking for a pelvic floor specialist or a physio that kind of does what you do, is there somewhere they go to look for that? And then leading on from that, how do people find you?
To find a pelvic floor physiotherapist, I would be typing pelvic floor physiotherapist into Google. I wouldn't necessarily just look for someone who's women's health physio. We in the profession, we call them women's health physiotherapists, but there's also women's health physiotherapists who don't do an internal examination. So if you're looking and calling, it'd be a pelvic floor or women's health physiotherapist. When you call and you want the internal examination, ask them on the phone, will they do an internal examination? Another couple of reasons that you might see a pelvic floor or women's health physiotherapist is if you experience pain during sex or it doesn't feel comfortable down there. And also if you have prolapse. So for anyone who doesn't know, prolapse is when one of the pelvic organs can protrude down through the vagina. So this could be bladder, bowel, or urethra, and it might just feel like there's an uncomfortable fullness or heaviness down in the pelvic floor all the time. If either of those things resonate with you, a pelvic floor physiotherapist or women's health physiotherapist will be your best friend at sorting that out. In terms of finding me, I'm on the Gold Coast in Mermaid Beach. I work for a company called Energy in Motion Physiotherapy. And I'm also on Instagram under the same name, Energy in Motion Physio.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you. I've learned so much today that I was not
that's good.
expecting. Thank you very much. And to everybody who has joined us today, thank you so much for joining us on another episode of The Transformation Project. Whatever platform you're listening to us on or watching us on, this episode might be useful for you to watch on YouTube if you've listened on audio. And because Liz did do a couple of demos in the background there. So that may be useful if it's something that particularly interests you. So you can find us on YouTube as well, just under the Transformation Project, with subtitles for those who are hearing impaired. Head over, give us a review, give us some love, and we'll see you next time on the Transformation Project. Thank you. Thanks, Liz.